characteristic of a natural systems. And let me just briefly walk you through some very pragmatic definitions that will set the mood and the framework within which we will discuss today's topic. A civilization in general is defined as an advanced state of human society containing highly developed forms of government, science, culture, industry, and common social norms. Interesting is that the theory of normal accident suggests that complex technological systems regularly give way to failure. So I allow you to imagine yourself how to use this in a framework of civilization. We also said last time that civilizations are often responsible for their own decline. However, their self-destruction is usually assisted. And we look through different ways, including climate change, including pandemics, including the oligarchies and a very autocratic, almost dictatorship approach to the leadership. We also discussed the rivalries and, of course, the unpredictable conditions that happened and had serious consequences. What do we know? That about the civilization, they all have fallen eventually. That's a really good one, regardless of its dominance or superiority. So all 28 civilizations that we are aware of today, they all had incredible, glorious peaks, and they disappeared, like usually in a matter of decades or so. Glorious times were limited in geographical scope, so far isolated, surrendered by less developed primitive tribes, which mostly contributed to their complete destruction once they started to fall. Success was based on favorable conditions, innovation, and a very especially innovative leadership, which usually then went into another extreme. And at the end, bad leadership brought the civilization down. There was a lack of wise leadership at the time of the dawn, no capacity to readjust and transform or reinvent. And that's how they entered into a total destruction. Usually they were associated with wars, famine, pandemic, natural disaster. And as I mentioned before, some of them were very much affected by serious climate change. And type of ending, we've seen permanent destructions. We've seen some that recovered a little bit and partially transformed into the next civilizational paradigm. And we had those that revived of small territories. They were able to just preserve a little bit and kept the name from that time. Rome is a typical example of it, but of course it does not resemble the size and the magnitude of the Roman Empire at all. Or anything that was left behind were just ruins, like many Latin American empires, like Mayan and Incas. So conditions for rising: fertile land, advanced leaders, shared beliefs, discovery of new science, mathematics, architecture, agriculture, new resources, bronze, then gold and iron, new transportation means like ships, for example, and good geographical position being at the crossroads of different trading routes, strong cultural identity and boldness of the earlier settlers. Reasons for prosperity: very advanced leaderships, rich culture, writing was very important one, governance, administration, so setting up the governance models and administration models, basically setting up sort of a predecessors of state and empires, modern army, very often, prosperous science again, architecture, medicine, advanced agriculture approach, new ways of fertilizing the land and rising the yield, cross-cultural collaboration, including translation and speaking many languages in order to govern and lead better, early diplomacy. Many wars were avoided in the times of prosperity due to diplomatic activities, marriages, and of course, global trade. And you will see a lot of similarities also in the reasons for fall. I mentioned already climate change, long climate cycles or change of cycles, genocides, fear and hate, often the internal struggles for power, pandemics. Usually the civilization that was on the fall went through a period of pandemics, civil wars, revenge, manipulation, loss of beliefs in the local gods due to some disasters that the people had to go through. Poor leadership, new powers arising on the edge of their empires, rebellions, clash of the worlds, cruelty, brutality that usually prompted the resistance and fight, paranoia, and of course, military coup. So from the previous talk, some very powerful messages emerged. First one, in the past, we only understood what happened when it happened, looking back. Today, we can see, learn what is going on while it is going on. Can we use this to reinvent ourselves as a civilization, or we will need to fail like so many civilizations before? So that's still the question that it's in the air for today as well. As soon as we allow the system to close, they start declining. We had a discussion around that too. The future might not be deterministic nor probabilistic, but possibilistic. Knowledge of the systemic leverage points that can skew or shift the probabilities of certain features in the direction that more favorably support dynamics that are life-affirming, future-creating, and opportunity-increasing. So that was a very powerful message which we will use today when in the second part of the discussion, we will talk about leverage points as well. Three more messages I'd like to share with you from the last discussion. We are challenged to live in a VUCA period and RUPT period. So we are invited to take this into the consideration and seriously include this kind of behavior in our understanding of organization, business modeling, or any other modeling, and of course, all levels of innovation. It will be essential, was a strong message as well, for our civilization to develop collective intelligence, which allows individuals to flourish at her or his full extent, harnessing the collective at the same time. We need to help each other to make time to learn from our past. We keep chasing our future without recognizing that reviving our past is not time lost, but perspective gained. It is time to raise awareness for evolutionary consciousness. And at the end, there is one sentence that also sticks into my mind. We are the systems we are waiting for. So let's engage. So for today's session, we have some already familiar guests, but we also have a new guest. So besides Stefan and Alexander, that you already know from the previous meeting, today we have also 𝙃, who will, with no doubt, raise some questions that will challenge us all. So let me just briefly say a few words about these guests. Alexander, he's one of the key leading global system science thinkers, a professor, a director of the Institute, and incredible with words, with the development of new expressions that kind of capture the momentum of a new era. So Alexander, it's great to have you with us again. Stefan is a director of institute that deals with the system science primarily and leads several different research projects in that area, but he's one of those down-to-earth practitioners of system science. So I'm looking forward to engage with you, Stefan, again. And 𝙃 has a very interesting CV and the description. And since he's new in this group, I will just read a little bit what he wrote about himself. So born in Zimbabwe some time ago, Presently, however, oscillates between Harare and Cape Town and any place that involves long distance travel. He performs across various terrains, ranging from what is expected of him to what he doesn't understand. It is in this latter territory that he feels he is at his most productive. Having recently completed a PhD, he has returned to offer creative, strategic, and manual labor support to organizations and communities regionally with more verve and newly found humility. He's working to extend his this continentally and beyond. So, Hethan, welcome, and I think we are ready to engage. So, my dear guests, let me just start with the first question that I would like to share with our guests as well. And this first question is to all of you, all three of you, what have you taken away from the previous discussion? What kind of prompted new thoughts, or maybe pushed you beyond what you were aware or what you had in your repository before you joined this discussion? So whoever wants to start first, please go ahead. Maybe Alexander, go ahead.
I was just offering it to Stefan, but all right. Hello, everyone. Great to be back here again with you, those who are coming back and those who are joining us for the first time. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to explore questions that matter, and not just abstract questions that matter. This is about, as 𝘂𝗲𝗍 said at the end, about learning to be the systems we wish to see in the world. What does that mean? How do we do that? And how do we do that both individually? Yes, that's something which we finish with a webinar, we go off and maybe we take forward some ideas in our own life, in our own way. But what does it mean to do this collectively? I mean, after all, when we talk about the emergence of a global eco-civilization, we're talking about something collective. And so is there a way we can do this together? It doesn't mean necessarily the 21 of us now here on this call, but it means that we do it in an engagement of interbeing. And this is something I took away from our last conversation. And one other thing I want to share is this notion of, oh, and by the way, that question of interbeing, it's a question. Can we do this? What does it mean to interbe? We're taking this as a verb. How do we interbe? Can we practice that here? How do we do this so that we feel that we're part of something larger than ourselves? This notion of Ubuntu from the Xhosa and the Zulu, where 𝘂𝗏𝗏 is. So the other thing is something that I'm sure 𝘂𝗏𝗏 will have comments on this as well, and it's the definition of civilization. We've been talking about that a bit, I'm still working with that. I'm still working with that, 𝘂𝗏𝗏 and Stefan and everyone. What I wrote down based on last time and this time is that, for me, in my way of looking at it, civilization is the state of advancement. It's just saying here, this is the state of advancement that represents the character of the collective human presence on Earth at any given point in history. So it's just saying, we can talk about the Neolithic civilization. And then we would be talking about, well, what's the state of advancement of humanity on Earth, the human presence on Earth, at that point in time during the Neolithic, right? We can talk about, Bronze Age civilization. We can talk about the civilization during the Middle Ages, but of course, we're talking about only a portion of humanity at that point. We can talk about the Chinese civilization and the empires that they had, and that's another area of the world. And so now we start to look at different parts of what is a global ecosystem? Can we talk about the collective human presence on Earth and come with a general characteristic, not that we need to do that now here, I'm just saying is that, for me, that's what we're talking about. The potential to say the global ecosystem, the global eco-civilization would be what anyone coming from some other planet would look at Earth and say, oh, look, this is what the humans are doing. This is how they are now. This is what they look like. And that for me is what I understand to be civilization. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's the best or the state of the art in terms of like we're the most advanced. It just means it's the current, what most characterizes the human presence on Earth. So that's what I'm taking away from our last conversation.
Well, thank you very much. So maybe Stefan, go ahead, and then we'll give a chance to 𝘂𝗙 to reflect on how he felt when going through our minutes from the last session. Stefan, go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody, Stefan from Austria. Very nice, Violetta mentioned. Yes, many things have already been said, but it moved me deeply last time that we came to this point of the consciousness being through evolution aware of itself and then also aware of change as it is happening. And I was puzzled or let's say disturbed, which is always good because then your thought processes start, I guess, mine do, about some things like, for instance, the discussions we had about the terminology of civilization, because it seems that there is, and this is what I wrote down, this distinction between an historic term, so it's being used in history, where civilization equals kind of empires who then have some let's say, power for a certain time in the history of our planet and mankind. And otherwise, there is civilization being used as a term, rather as a systems term, I would even say, for a complex structure of society. And complex in the sense of that it is formed by more the outer, the environment, where at a certain time in a certain place, this structure is needed actually to be productive or to be in interdependence and maybe also to survive. And so I would rather see this when we're talking here also about this question of the global eco-civilization as one of these possible pathways to a new complex structure. And we also came to this point where this hasn't been mentioned yet, but last time we talked very deeply about the question of not only the present. There was this wonderful quote of every generation thinks it is special. And then I was laughing out loud because I said, yes, but no, as every generation is special because it is the now generation, of course. This is special that it even exists. How wonderful is that? But on the other hand, if we are aware of our heritage, not only on an individual basis, but also on a collective basis, and then not only, let's say, on a geographical basis, but on a global basis, this is something that really empowers us for the current, or as I would call it, present future, the future that is present in the now. So this is one of the things that came up for me, and also the paradoxons. As I said now, every generation is special, yes and no. There were two other things I haven't reflected on last time, but they echoed in my mind very long. One of you said, it's not society, so it's not many people who are changing actually a status quo, but it is a few individuals. And I know that this is often cited, and it, let's say, I doubt it. I just want to bring that in, And I would like then further explore this question also. Is this really true? Like few individuals have the ability to change? And here again, I would say yes and no. And this is one of the wonderful paradoxes I would like to explore. Also, there is another one, there's another quote that echoed in my mind after our last meeting, and that was someone said, "We are all one," like the oneness, right? Here again, I doubt it. Yes and no, meaning in a way we are connected, interdependent, maybe even, you can look at it from different standpoints of science, there is a nucleus in all of us who is one in a sense of oneness. But then, interestingly, we are so different and so beautiful different and so beautiful diverse that enables us to be not only individuals, but also in the collective. I would say Heaton also loves to travel like I do. Oh my God, when we will be able to do that again. But the beauty of traveling is that I'm going to places and meet people who are so different than everything I have seen before. What an amazing experience. And so this question of, are we one? Also from my observations, yes and no. And I would like to explore that more. Thank you for the start of our conversation today.
Thank you, Stefan, for this insight. I think this different and alike. I think we will be exploring this a lot. And as Sander suggested, what would the alien species see? How would they identify humanity? What will be the characteristics that they will give us if they observed us? And that is probably something indeed that will prompt the common space, or define the common space within which we can then define our common path to the civilization, or potential new civilizational paradigm. But Heaton, now it's your time. Please explore your opening statement, your feelings, your emotions, your challenges when you think about civilizational paradigms, please.
Thank you very much. I was really kind of struck by, and I am still struck by, the note that's made to the notion of exceptionalism. And so when we think about civilizations, we think about them as kind of being in kind of very superlative terms. So, you know, the kind of most advanced, the most highly developed. I mean, Alexander's note that kind of calms that exceptionalism down a bit is really appreciated. But it got me thinking about how we understand civilizations sustaining themselves in the past. And essentially, we have, if there's a lesson that we learn, we understand that it's something that proposes itself as a kind of, as a destination of development. And our conditioning to then kind of have to conform to something that sees itself as better than, at some point is going to disappoint us. And so the stamina that this exceptionalism has is something that I thought was really quite interesting to question, whether we look at the Romans or the different civilizations that you looked at. It got me thinking about the fact that what happens to the spaces that we're not looking at. So essentially the civilizations that we're looking at, or the ones that are used as kind of examples, are the ones that feature in history books that get documented and written in a particular way. What happens to the ones that we don't see? And what happens to the ones that are small and extraordinary, and in a sense have persisted over time that we just don't notice because they're not superlative? They don't trade in the ways in which we are recognized to see something that is kind of worth looking at or interesting. That also kind of started to lead into this understanding of a kind of collective civilization. A collective versus, I guess, a kind of a lateral thing. So for me, collective proposes a kind of idea of homogeneity. So collective means that we all come in to understand something together and we agree to kind of move forward in a particular way, but as a group. Laterally proposes a complex system, and one in which, as Stefan was saying, the beauty of kind of difference is that learning is then interwoven and continues. Oftentimes from, well, the kind of research that I've done since this subject was kind of brought to my attention, which I really, really appreciate a lot, is the fact that the examples that we're trained to look at, or that are kind of available to us, ultimately kind of, as you use the word fail or fall, for me, I kind of want to use the word transition, because I think they kind of break up into smaller pieces. They do so because at some point that kind of grand idea of how we should be living starts to form a crack. And because you believe in something so kind of highly, and it raises itself on a pedestal so highly, it falls quite rapidly. But it's less about the fact that something kind of fails or disappears, but the fragments that then get scattered. So it's a bit like a beautiful vase that gets broken, and those shards kind of land in different places. And it's how those things start to, maybe those become seeds or kind of fragments that we can build on. And lastly, just to kind of round up, the word new is really interesting to me. If we are to recognize something that's new, is it not something that we remember? Because something that is truly new is something we won't recognize. So maybe this thing of an emergence of a new civilization is something that we have to train ourselves to use the kind of common, kind of fashionable parlance right now, which is to unlearn something, unlearn recognizing something. Maybe it's to kind of undo our kind of bent towards exceptionism and maybe look at something banal, which I think is an interesting provocation. Can we look for something that is boring as a way forward?
Wow, that is truly a good provocation. Thank you, Heden. And of course, you will be able to explore your thoughts further. I would, before we go to the next step, building on what we've learned last week, what we've heard today, we already have an interesting question from Sonia, asking, is the future in only one civilization, or can many civilizations coexist? In the past, the story was that there were many civilizations coexisting, and many of them didn't know about each other. So the challenge today is, and Alexander was specifically asked to respond to this one, but I would like to ask Heden and Stefan to think about this as well, is this globally connected world, in spite of all diversity, capable of building on something, as Heden just said, that looks very normal, that looks very actually boring, and defines the common denominator for our coexistence. So Alexander, what's your thought about it?
Well, first I must mention that I'm in some level of civilizational impact here, because there are workers outside who are drilling. So I hope you can hear me okay, and I apologize for this. See that? You probably can hear that. That's very annoying. Yes, I think that's this is an important question. I think as to whether or not we could talk about a global civilization now, or we have a collection of civilizations of what Heden was talking about. I think this is exactly what we are considering. This is what Violetta is calling us all to consider. Is there the potential now to really talk about a global civilization, not a monolithic, unitary, singular, undifferentiated, we are all one in that sense, civilization, but a civilization that is made out of the unity in diversity, that has a common identity as humans on Earth, and yet has full spectrum humaning, like I talked about last time, right? The ability to human well in all of its different flavors and fashions and cultural norms. To answer the question specifically, I would, two things. I would say, one, I would say we are now kind of at the potential point for a global civilization. This is what, again, I think 𝘲𝗏𝗍𝗃 is calling us to think about. We have a potential, maybe, to interlink the different civilizations. This is what 𝘲𝗏 was discussing, I think, in terms of a lateral interwoven civilization. Imagine if we could make this kind of lateral interwoven civilization. It would be more of a rhizome than a hierarchy. It's not the imposition of a hierarchical structure of organization, but a rhizomic structure like the plants, the tubers that exist in wonderful nodal networks of interdependence, but not of domination or dominance. So I think that's the potential that we have now. And this is what I hear 𝘲𝗏𝗍𝗃 calling us to think about, is to like, look, we really could emerge I like the idea of this eco-civilization because it's not a networked civilization. That seems sterile. That seems like it might not be alive. But an eco-civilization has like it's an ecosystem. It has a living quality to it. And so it's not managed from the outside by a central government sort of thing, or by the inside, wherever you want to look at it. It is truly co-evolving. And the second point I want to make, and then I'll pass this on, is it made me think about Einstein's theory of relativity. What does that have to do with this? Well, Einstein has a general theory of relativity, and a special case, a special theory of relativity, right? I think we could think about civilization in a similar way. There is a general civilization that we can talk about as the human presence on Earth at any given point in time. That's civilization in a general sense. Then there are specific civilizations. There is in history, we talk about the Mayan civilization, the Inca civilization, the Roman, empire, and the civilization that was given. There's specific instances, right? So we might be able to think about it in both ways without saying it has to be civilization is just something about the expression of a particular society through its particular cultural norms. And the way in which it dominates, or something like that. That might be a study of the rise and fall of civilizations with an S, plural. And then we can talk about what is human civilization on this planet. And again, not trying to say that we are more civilized than the savages or something like that. Not that, but something that represents the current state of simply human presence on Earth. That is what is how else could we, I don't know how else to express that. Global society, we could say that, but that is more about how we are organized than about the state of our presence, the quality of our presence. So those are some things to
Let me pick up here.
Share.
Yeah, Alexander, I think this was a very important message also, asking us to maybe go back to the basic definition of civilization and see if we can redefine what we consider to be a civilization altogether. And 𝘲𝗏𝗍𝗃, I'd like you to come in right now. And before you take over, I'd like to read one of the questions or comments that was here in the chat, which I think could further expand the topic that we are trying to address. 𝘖𝗏 says, I think coexistence of society is only possible as a development and sociological gaps is possible when developmental and sociological gaps are closed and a vertical development gets into move. So 𝘲𝗏, could you bring this comments from Alexander and the comment from 𝘖𝗏 together into, again, another provocative question?
Okay. Thank you, Alexander. That was very interesting. But surely when you talk about what you're talking about, it's not civilized, it's more anarchic, really. Surely when we think about a kind of rhizomic structure in itself, it has its freedom to grow in whichever direction it needs to, without kind of impingement, without any kind of barrier. And so are we looking at a kind of flipping of how we understand the word civilization, and kind of ontologically, we understand the notion of being civil and the word civilization as a kind of performance, a performance of us as a being, and how that civilization kind of attracts a kind of moral framework also, which I think is pretty fascinating. So when we talk about the fact of kind of multiple civilizations intertwining, and we kind of extend the language to kind of rhizomic kind of growth, are we not then proposing that potentially the framework of how we understand civilization is something that we can start to question a little bit now? And maybe the kind of the misbehavior, the testing of boundaries in order to look for something new is quite interesting. And then potentially maybe 𝘖𝗫's comment around the fact that kind of sort of developmental and sociological gaps, as we understand them, yes. It's not necessarily, I think, that they need to be closed or that they are closed. I think that they're quite restrictive. If we start to open ourselves out to understand, you know, the one of the questions that kind of frames this session is really, at what point, and sorry, 𝘂𝗏𝗍𝗧, if I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, is
No,
at what point do we, like, what is the evidence that we use to kind of recognize emerging civilizations? And I go back to this question around new. How do we learn how to not trade on the familiar? And I think Alexander's note to kind of rhizomic development for me is really fascinating. I think it's really interesting because in a sense, kind of, we understand civilizations to have existed because they've been organized. They've been organized around a particular set of thoughts, a particular set of practices. And they form, in a sense, quite kind of, I guess, linear organized systems. If we allow something that is more kind of intertwining and kind of shifting around, and that we watch the growth as opposed to try and kind of contain it, what happens then? Thank you.
But Hitan, this goes really well with the question that Indra imposed just now. Is a civilization in the eye of the beholder? So it's which point of view do we take? Any comment on that?
Can we take all? Can we understand a kind of, you know, from a maybe kind of from slightly sort of spiritual or kind of philosophical sense? Do we understand, how do we understand our own civilization in ourselves? How do we organize ourselves in a way that presents us as a kind of cohesive, coherent, cogent person? And the idea of humaning is a fascinating thing. So can you, if you are able to human yourself in a particular way, how is that then shared outwardly? How do you then reflect out your personal civilization or sense of it?
Can we actually not be personal? Can we have a view that is not our view? That's a very philosophical question, of course. Or is this collective capable of such a view? We might discuss this in the second part, but these comments really raise many new questions. But Stefan, any comment from your side?
Yes. I'm not sure if it fits now to the questions, but this went on in my head. Human, and what came up was the Human Rights Declaration. What I found very interesting is that the Human Rights Declaration is quite young. Still, I mean, now it becomes 70, but it's, let's say, a generation old still. And before that, as far as I'm educated, we as humans were not sure if we are equal or have the same rights. We had the opportunity to call others non-humans, although they have been part of our species. there have been things like slavery in the midst of Europe, in agriculture, for instance, quite a common social construct and norm and a paradigm. And many others. It's just one of the things because I was once interested in my own family history, and I learned all this, especially when it comes to farmers and agriculture, that they have been the first ones be called free citizens, for instance. Wasn't next to, of course, some of the aristocracy, but for non-aristocratic, they were the farmers here in my country, at least, who were the first free persons. And then there were a lot of unfree persons, and these unfree persons haven't been humans. So I guess at this point where we decided, and even I know that in this today world, the Human Rights Declaration is not in place and not common for everyone, but at least for a majority, I hope. But at one point we came to this conclusion of, and I think that's a conscious conclusion of, wait a second, we are humans. Shouldn't we be, at least amongst each other, treated like those? And I'm just thinking now forward, if we come to this declaration, at any point in time, we could come to another declaration that says animals, that says planet, that says and what have you. And I think that this is a maybe civilizatory process, or how would you like to call it? That's what I had in my mind right now and what I wanted to share. At any point in time, we could come to these conclusions and to these agreements.
Super. Thank you, Stefan, for this thought as well. Can the future civilization maybe even expand this awareness on a value level and be more inclusive to everything that is alive and maybe even beyond? So that's a profound thought that could be explored further. And I think all three of you gave us the starting point to the next question that is on the table for today. And in order to dive into it, we also have an excellent comment and question from the audience regarding that. Our sort of challenge for today is to reply, to explore possibility to define the network or the map of leverage points that we should monitor and pay attention to sense the weak signals that are actually bringing the change, or maybe even a big change along the way or in the future. So is that even possible when we look back, we see that most of the things seem to happen beyond the prediction. So they were surprises that somehow we plan, and life kind of twists everything around and provides a different solution. Can we, with the systemic thinking and with system modeling, actually come up with some leverage points that could give us a sense of these transformations, that could give us a sense that something is rising, having a peak, and then falling or being challenged, and instead of a complete destruction that we've seen so far with civilizations, or this fragmented dispersion of parts of it into a seeds into something new, can we reinvent ourselves? And Indra also made another comment regarding that, and she says, what do you feel are the obstacles to such a global civilization? Can we put aside the simple concept of lack of will or inability to collaborate? Is there something more to grab with it? Is the role of technology, what is the role of technology, and is it also an obstacle, technology itself? So let's dive into this challenging question of can civilizational transformation be monitored, and can it be actually reinvented by humans, or they are the laws of nature that are higher than the civilization and humanity itself, that kind of also are pushing us into some sort of cycles, like climate change cycles? Alexander, would you like to start?
Well, we certainly don't have a problem trying to figure out what to discuss here, do we? This is very
No.
very rich and very engaging, and I'm looking forward to also being able to engage with everyone. I'm sure everyone else has comments and suggestions here as well, and not just the three bearded individuals coordinated by by our leader here, Violeta. But as they say, with great beard comes great responsibility. All right, let me move on anyway. Two things. I don't know why things are coming in twos today, but they are. Stefan was talking about, and I'm going to exactly get to the question that we were just now raising, that Inder was also asking us to think about. But can we actually make this change happen? Can we, as Violeta is asking, can we monitor this? Can we see what's happening? How do we make this change happen? So a while ago, Stefan made a very kind of counter Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead is the one who said, never doubt that a small group of individuals, a small group of committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And he's saying, I wonder about that. And I think it is a both and kind of frame, because there's this guy called Ludwig von Bertalanffy, I don't know, Stefan, you know of him, who talked about this notion of instigating causalities. And instigating causality is something that sets things in motion. There's in system dynamics, they will talk about the trim tab. And that's where you have, on a very large ship, for example, to be able to turn it, you can't use even the hydraulic system to turn the huge rudder in the back. There's too much force against it from the flow of water, but you have a small rudder in the big rudder, and you can turn that small rudder, and it starts setting in motion the flows around it that start to push the big rudder, and then you can change the big rudder to steer the ship. But you need to have the trim tab. So this is kind of like an instigating causality. It means the things that set things in motion, something that sparks, that perhaps moves. So I do think the role of the individual is there. Now, it only is there if it connects. So I think that we need to have a couple of kind of intelligences that maybe our species is coming to play with. So collective intelligence is one thing, but that doesn't happen unless we have first connective intelligence. Connective intelligence is this kind of trim tab ability to say, to whom are we connecting? With whom? With what people? With what resources? With what systems? With what technologies? There was a question in there, what technology also has to play with, because some technologies are limiting and other technologies are opportunity increasing. So how do we have connective intelligence, which then can platform or scaffold collective intelligence? And that, I think, is the hope, because this gets to something else. I'm focusing on Stefan right now. This gets to something else Stefan was talking about, which has to do with where we say what it means to be human, and the fact that we are often saying that we are human, but everyone else really isn't. The Napoleon Chagnon has done his anthropological studies of the Yanomamo in the Amazon rainforests, and the word Yanomamo, which is who they are, means human. So they simply mean us. You're not Yanomamo, you're not human. And this is the history of so much of the kind of negative civilizational dominance frames. But it comes, for me, down fundamentally to the question of whether we can transcend racism, because prejudice is in there. Racism is not a scientific fact, or a race is. It has no basis in biology. It's purely a sociological construct, a race compared to another. And being able to see our blind spots. This is something that we talked about last time with VUCA, right? The volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in. We can only address that through collective intelligence, where we can start to say, okay, well, here's your blind spot. If we think that our way of life is the best and others should adopt our way of life, there's a prejudice built right into that. And so the question now coming to what Ethan was talking about in terms of the rhizome as anarchic structure. I disagree. I don't think the rhizome is anarchic. I think it's wonderfully organized, and it has a pattern of growth and of development that is not random at all. But it is inclusive. It's like the possibility. People will say, look, if you have an organization where somebody isn't directing it, and then that means it's going to be random, chaotic. On the other hand, if it's going to be directed, then you're going to avoid that. You either have the choice between it being random or directed. I don't think that's true. That's a false dichotomy. You have the opportunity of creating systems, of creating dynamics that allow for the system to be direction generating. It can generate its own direction. This is the basis of what Umberto Maturana and others talk about as autopoiesis, right? So yeah, who directs the forest? Another good questions that we're coming up with here. You know, by the way, in pre-colonial times in the Western, I'm going to talk about it this way, in the Eastern Pacific Rim of the Northern Americas, there were people, that what we call now First Nations people, who consider themselves to be shepherds of forests. Shepherds of forests. Now, they weren't trying to direct the forest, but they were looking at themselves as forest shepherds. How can we be part of that kind of dialogue with nature, but with each other as well? So just to wrap things up here, I think that we can, oh yeah, autopoietic, I can't read my handwriting. I think we can move in this direction of more autopoietic dynamics, taking lessons from history of different civilizational change. For example, the Mayan civilization was one of great domination. It came in, it dominated another local culture, and it would wipe it out. And it would adopt them into its own way of being and impose its own type of organization. The Incas didn't do that. The Incas would spread their empire, but include the best practices and the ways of life of the other societies that they engulfed. They still made a connected system, but they morphed and changed, and based on the best practices of different peoples. So all this to say that I think that we can use a kind of systems approach to foster the connective intelligence to collective intelligence to collective wisdom, and that this can be done both through the instigating causalities of individuals and through the necessary engagements as an interbeing, because the interbeing truly is the basis of a collective identity of our species, maybe a transhuman species on planet Earth. Last thing, Violetta, one last thing.
Because this was such a good one. Okay, go ahead, go.
Just say one last thing, and it's just a parenthesis here. Heaton also talked about unlearning, and I'm a disbeliever in unlearning. I once you've learned it, it's in your system. You can repath it. You can create new connections and new paths. But unless you hypnotize yourself to forget that thing, you're not unlearning. You can repurpose it. Now that's wonderful. And we must learn to repurpose much of our ways of being. I do think of that. But that's a small parenthesis. That's a tangent. So I'm sorry about that. But let me pass it back to you.
That's great, because now we have a bit of a drama happening. So Heaton, I expect you to respond, if I may. And especially, we're still sort of exploring that we don't lose the track. We're still exploring the thought, can we set up a system, a network of leverage points that could help us to observe more, to be more in the presence of now, and understand what's going on around us in order to prepare ourselves better, or maybe co-create the future better. Heaton, go ahead, and then Stefan, I'd like you to comment both of their comments.
Okay, I take on the challenge that a rhizome is not anarchic. I mean, that's a really interesting comment, and the fact that in itself it's quite organized. I'm willing to take that on as a kind of as a kind of sparring point, but I think we should have a call at some other point, because I think it'd be a really productive argument. I kind of I don't necessarily agree, but I think it's really useful. It's really useful to kind of understand that one system thinks of it in a particular way, and another thinks of it in another way. I think the thing that I'm sort of getting out of this is that, you know, the point of civilization, the point of us wanting to recognize or learn how to recognize or repurpose the way in which we understand something to recognize a new civilization, is because at the heart of it, we all want to try and find ways to live well. And what is that is our purpose or our kind of aim to live well, the common denominator that we're kind of headed towards. How do we understand that as a collective force, and then use that common denominator to kind of to put forward what we understand as the ways in which we can live well in the company of lots of other people living well. And so maybe that is the sense of maybe that's the sense that could be quite interesting to look at. I mean, one of the things that has been quite present in this part of the world, and I'm sure it exists in other parts of the world, but for the last few years, is because of successive generations of monocropping, the land in these parts of the world has been completely obliterated. And so there's been this thing about having to understand this thing of permaculture and how kind of nature thrives on the fact that there are different systems in its kind of, and there are different systems in plants and kind of growth mechanisms and harvests that happen, which means that things regenerate. And so potentially maybe what we could be doing is maybe looking away from humanity for the signs of a new civilization. Maybe we're not the answer. Maybe there are other systems that we could be looking at that, in a sense, evidence themselves as kind of great civilizations that are not human. And that is kind of something more kind of nature-oriented. I'm kind of looking at examples that we see around the world where, for example, places like Chernobyl, where, you know, humans had to evacuate because too poisonous for them. But, you know, recently over the last few years, you start to see photographs of this extraordinary kind of life just persisting when we're not there. And maybe that's something interesting for us to understand, is that maybe we're not at the we to take ourselves out of being at the top of some particular chain of organization, and, you know, in a sense, truly try and find a way to integrate with the many other systems of life that exist on the planet. That could be quite interesting. The other thing I kind of want to bring up is kind of, and it's an area of particular interest for me right now, which is kind of speculative research and proposing experiments and proposing conversations that stretch our understanding of what is familiar, what is comfortable, for the purposes of really exploring something that is new. You know, using arts-based kind of methods or arts focus methods to take something into the abstract, into the surreal, to kind of break something to see what will happen in a kind of experimental way. And I think that could be quite an interesting way in which for us to think about new civilizations, as opposed to kind of watch for what could just be kind of, in a sense, rehashing itself.
Wow, Stefan, I'm glad it's your turn. These were some very strong messages passed by Alexander and 𝘂𝗏. Go ahead. What's your response?
Yeah, and now what is my response? Well, one is I'm glad that I still can provoke with some sentences such wonderful responses from you both. And the other one is, here's the next provocation. By the way, I do deeply agree with almost all you said. But there is one thing, Heather, you said that at the last moment, take what the humans we should take us out, like we should not be so self-aware anymore, or self what? Self. I even can't. Maybe you can repeat it, because otherwise I'm making a
well, one powerful message from Heden, the way how I understood it, and was that we need to look beyond humans for systems to inspire the next human civilization, but, you know, to expand the space within which we think that goes beyond what makes us comfortable. Yeah, so that in that kind of sense. But Heden,
not necessarily human civilization. It's not necessarily the next human civilization, but the next kind of global civilization. And if we understand global, that really takes into account everything that is on this planet, not only us.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just like, isn't that what we always did? Unfortunately, under different, let's call it worldviews, but the beauty of the human species is our capability, and then with the capability come all the trouble of our self-awareness, and and through that also the capability actually that we can manipulate ourselves and our environment in a way, maybe in the let's say in the amount or extent no other species so far known did consciously. But there is something I like, and that comes from Alexander. He once told me a story. The question is, what the heck is the purpose of the species human on this planet Earth? I mean, seriously, would any unguided evolutionary process produce something like the one species that can destroy itself and everything else? Is that our purpose? And I like the flipping of this coin. What if, and I like it very much, it is our purpose to be conscious and to be conscious shepherds of evolutionary processes. And this is why we got this wonderful gift by the whole evolutionary process. What if we are not the cancer that some would like to propose on us as a species? As I guess we are part of the whole living ecosystem, and being gifted in this particular way, it is our purpose. I'm really confident to be shepherds, gardeners, whatever you come up now with other wonderful pictures.
Stefan, may I ask you here something? Because yes. When you raise this issue, what if we are not, you know, the destruction? What if we are the hope? And could the next level of consciousness that we can collectively develop with with the self-aware individuals, do you think we can expand that, our understanding of interdependence with everything that is around us, and then maybe keep moving towards this global civilization within the framework that Heden proposed, so that goes beyond just humans? Not, is that?
Yes, and just by the pragmatics of my own observations, I would say, as I said last time, I am super confident, and I'm certain that this is already happening. And that is because not only in my direct environment, but also in everything I could absorb, things we've been talking about 10 years before. I mean, me personally, others you see here, which caused us to be socially excluded. I mean, I had this direct experience. I was talking about the same things as I'm talking today about the consciousness towards other human beings called responsibility, the consciousness towards the environment, responsibility, the consciousness towards not only the present, but also the past and the future. And it happened that in very well-educated circles of human beings, nobody wanted to chat with me in a break of a conference because I said this out loud 10 years ago. Nowadays, if I say that, I mean, the younger generation tells me, man, you're old, right? We're doing that, right? We are living that. I mean, we're living it to an extent that you even wouldn't share our lifestyle with us. And it's true. I could not travel, let's say, miles or kilometers in my matrix, even through Europe and not across continents without using an airplane. They shame me for this. Like the younger generations I'm working with shame me for this. It's just a very personal and pragmatic example. So I'm saying the next generations are already practicing something that is even beyond my personal comfort zone in this full consciousness. In my own generation, I can talk not only freely now about this, I might even be cheered up for this. What 10 years ago...
Consider the guru.
Huh? Yeah, what 10 years ago caused me to leave a room alone. So yes, certainty. There are different speeds, or is it called speed? Like different, you know, how fast something is going, and it's depending on again the local current social and technological constructs, for instance, and that this doesn't mean one is far more developed and the other might be less in the sense of development. That's not the question. The question is it possible? Are you socially what is it called? Do you get benefits for this new behavior, or are you excluded? This might be a very strong leverage, for instance. So because we all want to be included in social groups, we all want to be part of others. If we are, for our ideas, for our values, excluded by the ones who are closest to us, it is hard to be what was Margaret needs a word, the dedicated individual to change something, right?
Okay, thank you. This is very strong also, the dimension of this individual relationship with the wholeness, with the collective, and the way how individuals can position themselves in this collective. It was interesting in two previous discussions last year on ecocivilization. We had one on ecocivilization and local communities, and the other one on ecocivilization and global communities. And there was a very strong message from global communities that they are completely reshifting the way how they are bringing a self-awareness to these global communities in two simple rules. First, and these are mostly the global communities that are based on circular economy and sustainable philosophy. First was that full transparency. So everything is seen and can be co-experienced by the entire community, global community. And the second one, which for me was so powerful, when they said that when they check if something that they're doing is right, what they need to do is to ask themselves deeply into their heart, is this the right thing to do? Can you imagine us doing that a couple of years ago in corporate environments? But this is what these global networks, global communities that are actually delivering value add, and they are actually business, some sort of business frameworks. That's how they, based on what they operate. And the other thing that they also picked up when we were discussing the local communities, it was very clear that what came through was very clear, is that the essence of local community is local identity. And through this local identity, these local communities are entering the global networks. They bring this identity as a source for diversity. And based on that, these global networks can deliver on innovation, and they can have a new ideas emerging because without diversity, they wouldn't be able to. So imagine now this powerful diversity, transparency, and do what it feels right. I mean, it's so alien to the current business modeling and the current business structures, but we already have a parallel world that is proving us that it works, and it delivers a value, and it delivers if you want, even the sustainable business environments. So with that comment in mind, I'd like to just quickly share with you one picture that we were able to put together in 2012 for the 2013 conference for System Science Society in Vietnam. And already at that time, we started to discuss system leverage points for an emerging thrivable planet. We call it officially through augmented relational intelligence, but actually what we had already at that time in mind, and Stefan and Alexander will recall this, we already had in mind some sort of eco-civilization. So when we look at this, what can we just throw away? Is anything still valid? Or based on what we just discussed today, can we improve this and maybe have as a starting point for the further discussion on how to look at civilizations? So I'd like to ask Alexander and 𝘂𝗙 and Stefan to respond, and then I will be opening up the podium for your comments. We have some great comments in the chat, and I'd like to invite people to come in and, of course, raise questions, comment what they've heard, and challenge us for the way forward. Alexander, do you still have drilling behind your back?
Yes, but that's my state of life at the moment. So
okay, go ahead.
As long as you can hear me okay, and hopefully with this here, anyway, yeah. If there's a problem, do let me know. And it's still there going on a little. Okay, there are, gosh, there are a couple of things. There are several threads here. What we've done so much exploring of various threads that all are related, but hard to then bring these into kind of a focus. And what I think is coming down to for me is a shift in the nature of our conversation. If this conversation is about recognizing all of these things, seeing the potential, understanding what's happening, better positioning ourselves in the flow of emergence, etc. Great, that's wonderful. We become kind of scholar practitioners, but are we actually going to change the path in this way? That's doubtful for me. And when we talk about, you know, what 𝘂𝗲𝗄 has mentioned there as well, you know, that again, who are the individuals who are going to make this change happen? A small group of dedicated individuals. As the saying is, if not us, then whom? If not now, then when? I mean, for me, the question really comes down to what do we do? Because talking about this, it reminds me actually of a scene from a Monty Python film called The Life of Brian, where there was one point where they were all saying something has to be done. So they got together a committee and they voted on it and said, we think we need to take immediate action. So who seconds this? And somebody voted and says, I second it. Okay, noted. We write it down and think, okay, next item. You know, I mean, again, it's this idea we can talk about this and it's wonderful. And we can feel very engaged and empowered. But behavioral change, where we take the responsibility for showing up differently in the world, that I think is a different thing. And I think a conversation for action, not necessarily for what others should do and how do we create a system for this emergence, that's also great. But what does it mean for us, individually and collectively? What does it mean to be an agent of emergence of a global eco-civilization? What can we do? Because if we don't start thinking about it like this, then we're just saying, oh, somebody else will. Maybe it's the newer generations Stefan was talking about, for sure. But I think it's going to take all of us to do this. And there's a lot that we can do to help catalyze the change, not just conceptually, but also with behavioral ways of engagement. So some things to wrap up here. Again, just coming back to the idea of, is this happening to us? Is it happening through us? 𝘊𝗵𝗻, actually, can you bring back the group to the common screen for a moment? Yeah, it gives me a sense I'm actually speaking here with people. Sorry. But this is something that we were all talking about. Heaton, I think, put a fine point on it, about, is this with the questions of permaculture and monoculture, same thing with the world of agriculture is the world of human culture, right? Is there a permaculture here that we're engaged in? Can we see how that could work? Permaculture is more than just a farming technique. It is truly a way of life and a way of being, and involves principles and values of interdependence. And this comes to something else we're recognizing through science these days. Quantum physics is understanding the essential entanglement of all things. It is not as if things are isolated billiard balls and atoms are separated units in a very discrete, disconnected universe. We are actually all entangled. There's the work of 𝘲𝘅𝗽𝗍 from 1974. He brings this into the social sphere, and he talks about how we are intertwingled. I like the notion of intertwinglement better than entanglement, because entanglement sounds like we got to get out of that. It's a bad situation for humans. But intertwinglement brings the magic of it in as well. And there is something about how we are surprisingly interdependent if we let that be. There's a beautiful quote from the 14th century Persian poet Hafiz, who says, I am the hole on the flute through which God's breath blows. Or I am the hole on the flute through which the universe expresses. This is the idea of letting ourselves being part of a larger narrative, but also knowing that this music is a life-affirming, future-creating, and opportunity-increasing music. What is our identity? How do we engage in it in this way? Again, beautifully, I think being the hole on the flute doesn't mean I am the flute, I am so important. It means I am the open space that allows for something to emerge. Takes a different role for ego. So I have this little thing, which is, again, more about the talk rather than about the action. It's very symbolic. It's this thing called now let's see, get the right light. Okay, it's the World Citizen Identity Card. Right? It's really cool. And it has me there, and it's stamped and it's official, and I can change in pencil where it is I'm living at any given time, although where I'm born and so on, those have fixed dates. And on the back, it has a little quote from Socrates. He says, I can't read it. He says, I'm a citizen, not of Athens or of Greece, but of the world. Right? I'm a citizen, not of Athens or of Greece, but of the world. How do we have it so that it's not just saying not of, but saying also and? It's a both and. We can have the special case and the general case of our sense of civilization. And finally, there's this movement now that, as Stefan was pointing out, among the Generation Z and others who are coming in onto the scene, called rewilding. And rewilding is the engagement with nature. It's not chaotic, it's not anarchic, It's actually learning with, and it's very about biomimicry. It's about learning with nature and seeing ourselves as part of a complex, interdependent web of life. How can we bring that kind of way of being into the complex, interdependent web of civilizations and of human beings, so we can human well together? The question that I find always very helpful when I'm thinking about this, like what 𝘲𝗏𝗍𝗶 was talking about, the kind of question that brings us into these bigger spheres, is what would love do? That asks the simple question for any challenge you have, any moral or ethical frame. Ask yourself, what would love do? As if you were personifying love. I'm going to leave with you here a link for an article that I wrote, but it has about the practices of bringing ourselves into frames of identity that go from the intrapersonal, just me, myself, and my skin, to the interpersonal, which is the social and the relational among human beings, to the trans species, which takes us into the spheres that Stefan was calling for. How can we have an identity as a life form among life forms on planet Earth? And the fourth dimension is the transgenerational. So we start to think, how are we part of a coherent narrative that we've inherited from our ancestors, and that we right now are future ancestors? Right now, we are ancestors in training right now. And how are we in that relationship with future? And that don't mean just generations of human beings. I mean generations of all life forms. And the fifth dimension is the pan-cosmic. How are we part of a broader narrative of emergence, where we can think again in terms of what would love do, because that might be the underlying driving force of coherence and emergence in the universe. Here's the link. I put it there in the chat. And
please do, yes. I just wanted to ask you, please put that also, these 5 layers, if you don't mind.
It's in that article. So the 5 layers are in the article. If it's okay, I'll just have you check it there.
Ethan, you've been challenged. So let's see. This is sort of a final comment before we bring the rest of the group into this discussion. What I can say is that this is fantastic discussion today for me, because it's opening up, it's broadening, as Ramit would say, it's broadening the space within which we can now engage and think and co-create. And I think, Hitan, that was somehow a message from you, your previous comments too, that we need to broaden the scope of, or the space within which we think and engage. Please.
I mean, first of all, I would just really want to say thank you for reaching out to invite me into these conversations and this kind of thinking, because I mean, like in a lot of ways, I think I'm not really the right person to be part of such a constructive conversation, because my mind keeps going towards the alternative.
But that's why we love you, and that's why we love to have you here.
Because for me, I don't know if I'm so interested or invested in kind of looking at the emergence of a new civilization. I have become really quite passionate towards looking at what were the hybrids or chimeras that we haven't seen, that we haven't recognized, and it has really started to kind of inspire a whole new set of research amongst with me and the kind of colleagues and students that I work with. It's this thing about what has been happening in places where we haven't been looking. Have things existed that have not caught our attention? And so in that sense, the purpose of what I feel this set of conversations are, which are necessary and really pertinent towards something, a kind of a constructive set of actions, I feel very ill prepared for, or kind of ill matched. I have to say, I put up 2 links to 2 podcasts. First of all, it's a really fantastic set of podcasts, a set of Indian academics, or various Indian academics and academics from around the world. It's a set of podcasts called Sin Talk, which were instrumental in me getting through my PhD. They are extraordinary. So the two that I put up, one called The Murmurs Before Arrival, and they're talking exactly about how do we recognize something before it appears? And 3 different academics take that on. And I think it's a really fascinating question, because what we're listening to here is how 3 different minds, and then with the questions of the rest of the audience coming in, each of us understand this word and this practice in a very particular way. And how that gets integrated is going to be really fascinating to me. And using the kind of mechanisms of speculative research, experimenting, is something I'm fully invested in. And I do think kind of what has made me think a lot about this is what would it be like to introduce these subjects to, or these questions to, very young minds who are not conditioned, and don't have to, as Alexander put it, and I agree, not necessarily have to unlearn or repurpose their kind of learning, but come to something a little bit fresh. And how can I listen to that? As much as it would be really difficult, and my conditioning would be to want to make sense of it, can I listen openly and see what emerges? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this just reinforces the thought that there are many paths lead to Rome. Yeah, so we need to expand our minds in many different directions, and I think today the discussion just keep opening up these different points of view, different approaches, and different repositories of inspiration through which we can then gain and grow and build this collective awareness. So I don't think there is right or wrong. There is just an incredible repository of different ways of expanding our mind. And that's, I think, what this global connectedness is bringing to us. Because you see, today, we were at one point, I mean, pretty much all continents again together. And you're from Cape Town, from Argentina, from Vienna, and we can talk with different points of view. We're expanding our minds. And I mean, I just love that, that we have this kind of opportunity. And that's what technology is giving us. And when Indra asked before, can we do it without technology? Is technology an obstacle or an enabler? And probably Stefan will say, it depends on how you use it. It could be an enabler or it can be an obstacle, but for us, it acts as a great enabler. So thank you very much for sticking with your points of view and not defending, but exploring them further with us, because this is recorded. We will continue to learn from this discussion. And that's the beauty of it, and a lot of good things are in the chat as well. So Hiten, if you don't mind, put the link to in a chat, that we can save it to the link that you were referring to and that you used for your PhD a lot. Thank you very much. Stefan, it's your few minutes, and then let's bring the rest of the crew on board. I mean, I can see so many great comments, and I'm sure that each of them has something to add to this conversation before we close it. Please, Stefan.
Okay. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I had this I don't know, feeling that you're more on the deconstruction, interested in the deconstruction than on the construction. And I do love this, by the way, too. As I said once to a dear friend of mine, but now is not the time to deconstruct, because he was constantly on that level. Sometimes we need to construct something, but I do understand it and I love it, and it's the one thing that really enables us to look to have this openness, and then also this is the way to go when you want to address the blind spots we have discussed last time. This is just a bridge I want to take also to this discussion. Is there the opportunity of addressing blind spots collectively? because you rather go the deconstruction way to shed light onto the blind spots. Doing deconstruction on a collective level, that's might be called anarchy.
But Stefan, maybe you've done it. There is a ritual that exists when you imagine completely tearing yourself apart in very small pieces and then re-establishing your own body, soul, mind, heart, everything. And you can really feel very fresh and inspired when you finish such a process. Could be something like that we could do for the systems as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. But as I said, then we will go through a phase of socio-political and socio-technical deconstruction, which might not be in the favor of everyone. But coming back to the one thing about the few dedicated and committed, sorry, this is the word, committed people who can change the world. Here is the yes for it. But this is the beautiful thing. There are so many initiatives, and from a systems perspective, we would call these niches. From an evolutionary perspective, also niches where the experiments that Hidden and others are conducting are happening, and where they can actually happen, because if they would be in the midst of a wonderful stabilized societal structure, they would be excluded. So we need to have this, and then watch this. So go beyond the. I mean, this is some language I use, beyond the current regime of how we organize ourselves, how we connect with each other, how we work together, and so on and so forth, how we live with each other, nature, etc. Look at the niches, but will the niches have any opportunity to actually inform the regime? And this is where you change, right? This is where you change maybe a whole civilization. And there is only one chance when this is happening, and this is happening when there is another pressure on the already established paradigm. And the other pressure comes from outside, from the landscape. It is the environmental change. It is also a conscious change. And then there is this opportunity that the new, which might be boring, I'm referring to that one now, because yes, some of the things I see now are indeed boring, but great. But they have the chance to enter the societies or the civilizational processes and change. And this is where you can have these three layers where you can watch actually the emergence. Not so much in this question of weak signals, but in true interdependence. If you have these three observation points, and then you can, of course, strengthen such dynamics by the outer conditions, not by the inner connectiveness. That's what I wanted to say also for the end of this round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your summary as well. Now I'd like to open the floor for those that stayed with us almost 2 hours. And are you ready to share your thoughts with us? Is there somebody who wants to start?
Yes, I will, if I'm allowed.
Go ahead, Martina.
Yeah. Well, for me, it doesn't feel like 2 hours. It feels like 2 minutes. Because it's such an interesting and vivid thinking going on. I would like at the beginning to point out that the concept of community is really challenged today. Violeta, you mentioned, local communities and global communities. But just yesterday, I learned that just in United States, there are 180,000 families living off the grid, meaning they left the current civilization or community, and they went somewhere in the nature to live independently of the current society or civilization. And I think this is a huge number, which is not connected with a locality. It is just spread it. And it is really interesting to see how they are connecting and what is their community awareness. They, on a certain level, they know about each other, and they are connected in the way of thinking and living and the value system and so on. So for me, the message of today is that we really have to spread our way of thinking. And I would go back to the beginning of today's meeting when you were summarizing the last meeting, saying why the civilizations in the past fallen apart. And it was many times because of some, let's say, underdeveloped communities or new civilizations interrupting with the civilization which was flourishing till then. And I take that as a message that we should never underestimate nobody and nothing. So for me, it is really important, the words that all the speakers use today, that it doesn't mean that something is good or bad or better or worse, but just different, and that we have to include, but not in this narrative that we include others. We have to include ourselves in others' way of thinking. So to be more active in the inclusion, in this inclusion process. So not to include others, not to see others or other things or beings or whatever as objects, but to include ourselves. And I was speaking about this Keegan theory. I don't feel entitled to elaborate on that, but he described 5 levels of consciousness, and in the 6 directions, which are every one of them is very important, I think, also for this talk about new civilizations and the development of human societies. But it is important the numbers which are changing, because only 50 years ago, for example, the majority of the human population on Earth, as far as I know, was on the level 2. Today is on the level 3. And we have more and more people on the level 4 and 5. And the complexity of things and thinking we are talking about today, for me, is at least level 4. Maybe we can say 5. And the fact is that the percentage of people on these levels is rising. And that means that more and more people are actively thinking and doing something about how they live their lives in this context. So I would finish up with this, it's not just about talking and thinking. People are already making changes. 180,000 families are living off the grid just in United States. So I think the evolution is already doing something, and the new civilization is here. That would be my comment.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for this very insightful summary of your reflections to this probably both days that we spent together.
Yes.
And many of things you put in the comments, so we will keep them in the archives and use them when appropriate. So who's next? Who wants to make a comment? Sonia, go ahead.
Thank you. First, thank you all for this insightful dialogue. It was really enjoying and it was giving a lot of new insights. I would just like to complement with that not just the mindset and not just the heart set, but also the consciousness set is something that affects our civilizations. And you have all mentioned how it is now the time that we need to nurture collective intelligence. And as is said by different sources, one of them also Mayan calendar, as Mayan were system thinkers, that we have now the highest possible consciousness on the planet Earth. And that this consciousness is allowing us really to work on a collective scale. And this was something that was not possible 10 years ago, or even before. Now it is possible. And this consciousness set, if I say so, is available for us as a collective, not for individuals. And this is something we need to elaborate, we need to nurture. And this, I believe, is something that will also help us co-creating an eco-civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for this very strong message and invitation to interconnect not only heartfulness and heart set and mindset, but consciousness set and intertwine everything in this collective intelligence where individualism still has a space. Yeah? It's not neglected and killed. So thanks a lot. And who's next?
Can I?
Yes, Meta, go ahead.
Hi. It really was an interesting and informative talk today, but I would just like to touch upon Sonia's words. You have mentioned our need to nurture our collective consciousness. And that is where I would like to touch upon something Stefan said. The provocative thought at the beginning when you said we are one, yes and no. And I would just like to propose the theory, the thought that perhaps both is possible and that we should somehow embrace it, maybe explore it a bit more, because this is where I come around to the 𝘋𝗀's statement that perhaps we are not the answer, and perhaps we should be more nature oriented. I think that in this collective consciousness, we can explore more of the consciousness that is in the nature, in the environment that surrounds us. And some solutions or ideas might come from there. Some might come from the individual, from the us as individuals, and some from the us as connected into one being or one consciousness. So I got the feeling that everything was connected, and that some things may need to be just explored a bit more. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Super, that sounds like VUCA concept to me. So I think we need to get used to it and start living it, not just pushing it aside and trying to be in this deterministic world. So thank you, Meta. Anybody else? We still have 8 minutes. Okay, Ramit, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just probably going to take a little bit of a different tangent and go back to the whole concept of civilizations and all that we were discussing both last week and this week. I think the first bit that I do want to bring out also is that in the past, most of the civilizations that have been before ours, right? One advantage perhaps, and I'm going to call it an advantage, may or may not be, that they had is that they started off in a part of our world or an area which hadn't necessarily been utilized to its fullest by another civilization immediately before them, right? Or had been transformed by another civilization immediately before them. I'm wondering whether the civilization that may end up emerging after ours will ever have that opportunity, given the fact that the number of human beings on this planet, all that we've been doing all across our planet and so on and so forth, and whether that situation of really a new civilization emerging is even a practical thought, right? And again, I'm being provocative, as has been the theme of this entire conversation today as well. But is it even possible for a new civilization to emerge, right? Because of all that we've done to our world today, right? Now, when I started thinking about that, and again, in the middle of all the conversations that we're having today as well, I started wondering as to what our purpose really is, because that was one of the things that we discussed. And a few messages on the chat also were talking about who will make the change. Will it be us who will make the change, or when will it happen? How will it happen? Who will do it? And then to a large part, it strikes me that if we in our lifetimes try and attempt to make that change, right, whatever it is that we believe should be that change, we may not end up being successful, right? And I actually see it from history, from the last 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. There have been a lot of scholars, a lot of people who've been trying to make that change, but all that they actually succeed in, right, eventually, is making it easier for those who come after them to actually make that change, right? So by taking things in bits and pieces, not as a more overarching change in that sense, right? So is then our purpose really not to be making the change that we all desire, right? And merely to be able to move those small little pieces that each one of us can, so that those who come after us can then keep moving more pieces, and then those that after them may move more pieces as we keep evolving towards an evolution of the civilization than a new civilization in totality. Because again, for a new civilization, as I said, I don't know, maybe we are too far down the path now to actually be able to envisage a new civilization by itself. I don't know, a lot of this was a bit provocative as well. It wasn't necessarily exactly what I think, but these were the kind of thoughts that were in my head. And I know we probably don't have time to be discussing all of that right now. So leaving that thought with all of you to think about.
Thank you, Ramit. I think this was a great actual introduction to your event on the 4th of March, when we will have the first session of Global Open House, where we will explore without keynote speakers exactly the questions that people would like to discuss and bring forward and provoke with. So hold on your thoughts, and maybe they could be a very good starting point for the discussion on the 4th of March. So Ksenia, would you like to share your thoughts? This is the first time you joined us.
I'm listening, and I have had like that. It was really very, very inspiring. And I'm happy to be here today with you, because I'm also a thinker in this way. What's the purpose of my life, of our purpose together? And I believe that this collective consciousness is part of our individual consciousness. So this is both ends. And I'm living with this question, how to connect and how to understand better this collective consciousness and also individuals. So yeah, I'm looking forward to be with you in March.
Super, thank you, Ksenia. And anybody else? 𝘂𝗶𝗹𝗹, would you like to? Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank everybody for, of course, all these amazingly wonderful sparkles that makes the mind and the heart work pretty, I think, even after the session. And the fact is that, I mean, I work a lot on helping people to find, you know, the essence of the true self. And what I notice is, given the fact that I'm being blessed to work very much with, on one hand, the divided mind, and on the other hand, and of course, what are the tricks of the divided mind, how many parts the mind has, and actually the unity the human beings have when we discover the self part. And what I can say, as somebody who, as I said, works on it, observes from the field, that there is some kind of very interesting unity of informations once we tap into the self. It is a kind of, I would say, Pandora box that still needs to be unwrapped. And as a civilization, obviously, we are right now coming, you know, in a kind of space where we are collectively reawakening those inner potentials. So, and what I'm seeing is that actually we might loosen up and really, really allow this process of, I would say, opening these beautiful gifts that are still being so undiscovered to unfold. Because I have to say, there even a notice, of course, that we are not separated. Is it a space of oneness and an amazingly creative space in present, which means that actually from it we can rediscover, I think, everything new, everything, I think all systems, the way we communicate, our voice, vibration, thoughts, emotions, everything, I think, is giving us an enormous big chance live to be reinterpreted, as you said before, reinvented. So from that aspect, when people ask me, you know, how I'm seeing these times, they are challenging on one hand for the divided mind, yet I see it as a strong purifier to give us the chance as a civilization to embrace those till now unknown to the mind potentials of what we are.
Wow, very powerful, 𝘂𝗶𝗹𝗹. How, I mean, I hope you're going to stick around and join us for other sessions as well. I mean, these are very settled thoughts that you shared with us. So thank you very much indeed. So we have Alia and 𝘄𝗶𝗃. Would you like to come in? Very briefly. Alia, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I have to thank everyone today because you made me think really deeply. And I have maybe a thought. I made a comment earlier that few, absolutely, I have to believe in the fact that few individuals can change things, right? Otherwise, I do not want to think of the alternative. This is one part of me thinking. On the other side, I'm thinking of what many of you have mentioned, and Alexander also, when he said that that quantum physics is describing the fact that the essential entanglements of all things. So we kind of all one again. And I was thinking of these two concepts in which I both believe, and they're kind of slightly counterintuitive, them being together at the same time. And we do not have time to talk about it, but I would really be interested in your thoughts.
This is another question for the open house, global open house. Definitely, you know, it's something that we can talk for hours about. But thank you. Let's put it down. Write it in the chat. This question, please. Okay. And we might come back to it. 𝘄𝗶𝗃, are you able to make a quick comment, or can you switch on? maybe not, because the connection is really challenging in Zimbabwe these days. So I'm glad that at least she was able to join us and follow this. Anyway, my dear colleagues, it's already 2 minutes past the hour, so we usually stop sharp. But allow me, I mean, this was for me as well a very exciting conversation. I mean, I have so many things kind of fighting within me with each other, but not fighting the fight that one needs to win, but fighting the fight where something new can emerge out of it. But I'd like to share a few thoughts with you that I put down very quickly that could help us to expand the way how we approach to understanding our future. One that Heaton was very strong on and kept coming back is to that he wants to focus on overlooked past and also the present in some sort of hidden histories that we do not find in our books, but they are in our collective mind. So I'd love to follow your work, Heaton, and get excited with what you're going to find out, and hopefully develop a method that we can use as well and try to tap into unspoken or unwritten materials that coexist in our space and time. Which, because last time we also talked that, you know, we have the memories of ancient around us, within us. It's just time we need to awaken them and let them work through us. So the other powerful thought was that we need to go beyond just humanity and connect and basically coexist, intertwine with everything that is on this planet Earth, not to dominate, but to really connect. And this resonates so strongly with many messages from previous talks when we were constantly invited to reconnect with the laws of nature, which we kind of shielded away from us and try to be very pragmatic and rational, just to realize that that's just one fragment of the whole picture and the whole system. There was a very interesting book also, The Social Transformation of the 80s and 90s, the era of aquarium, where one journalist put together everything that's been hidden or pushed aside because it did not fit into the mainstream. And that was the first time that I got really, really excited about understanding the world around me. And maybe we can actually collectively kind of bring to our awareness all these elements that were driving the transformation, but because they were not politically correct, they were pushed aside and forgotten. On the other hand, building the collective awareness is not simplifying and trying to make everyone to think the same, but it's actually harvesting the individuality within the collective, yeah, and then going beyond individual understanding and create something that only together we can create. And sort of the dance between these two is there is no right and wrong, as Meta also said. It's really harnessing both and be comfortable that it's not black and white, 1 or 2, 0, but that both at the same time can coexist. And this is another mindset that we need to switch off, because this deterministic way of thinking was like so exclusive. We're learning, and last time Alexander went deeply into this, what VUCA means for everything, that we need to be comfortable with that. So that is a powerful message that I got again from all of you today. And a question that Stefan also brought forward: what if we are part of the solution and not the threat? But I heard, Stefan, some underlying current there, but not the only part of the solution. Yeah. So that for me was also a powerful message, again, opening up the sphere, the space within which something new will will occur. And this is my last thought. What would I put in the middle of this couple of threads that or streams that now are coming together? What if we are not one? What if we are a network? And there is no unification in network, but it's all these words of intertwining, interconnectivity, they make sense. What if everything is a true network and has its own rhythms? However, because we're connected, we are at the same time also one. Now, that's my provocative thought for our next engagement. So I'm very deeply grateful to all of you to come share your thoughts. And well, I hope to see you soon in yet another event, maybe already on the 4th of March, where Ramit will host this very important discussion, open house discussion, as part of the eco-civilization movement as well. And next, hello, Kitty, or any of the future talks. So I'd like Stefan and Alexander and 𝘂𝗙 to stay online for a few more minutes, but for the rest, thank you very much, and go and live life, explore and expand and share.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank
you.